let's think about the world 6 months from now, a year from now. We're going to have such large context that all of this context engineering will become easier and easier. The important thing for developers to do is A, to build for models of the future, because if you start building today and you catch the market in 3 months, you have a completely different capability set. And if you're not very flexible, you're behind already.
One thing that I find really impressive is that being really good at the IMO is also just a really strong signal of reasoning performance. Those are things that translate to code performance. Those are things that translate to research performance. That generalizability and translatability of reasoning is also partly why we're so excited about these wins.
For agentic products, holding context is such a hard problem today. And if you don't hold the context, you can literally not have the right outcome. Is that something like Gemini is working on?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
This is a very active area of research across the board that I don't think any of the labs have really solved. And it's something that we would be happy to solve for.
So Tulsee and Madhavi, welcome to the show. And we are very excited to have you here today, chatting about Gemini and the Gemini model family.
We're excited to be here. Thanks for having us. Madhavi and I have been working together for a while, but we haven't gotten to do a podcast together. So this is kind of fun.
It's very exciting for us. This is our first time doing a podcast with you guys. So exciting for us as well. Before we get started, we'll be awesome to hear 10, 15 seconds about your background, what you do at Google, so our audience can visualize what your day looks like and what you're focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Madhavi Sewak. Nice to meet you. I work at Google DeepMind now for about a year. I worked on code, tool use. I work on a variety of experiences like AI mode, and I'm a distinguished researcher. I have the intense pleasure of spending my days with Tulsee Doshi, who I tremendously enjoy working with.
Yeah, I think also Madhavi's underselling her role a little bit here. She really does lead a lot of our strategic efforts on how we think about bringing AI to Google and to our Google products, which is awesome. And so I get to work with her because I lead the product team for Gemini. So I focus really on, if you think about the Gemini model as a product, right? What is our roadmap for Gemini's core capabilities? How do we want to bring these models to our various internal product surfaces, but also our various external set of users? And what does that look like ultimately? So hopefully, we've seen the momentum of Gemini's growth over the last year, and that's really what we're trying to push from the product and capability standpoint.
No, amazing. No, Gemini has made insane progress. I was at Google I/O and just seeing the announcements then, and even over the last few weeks, there's just insane excitement around what you guys have been putting out there. So maybe we can start there, right? If I'm a developer building an agentic company, what things should I be paying attention to within the context of Gemini and DeepMind?
Okay, I'll start and then I'll hand off to Madhavi too. I think so. There's two things I would say. One is the big thing, then the big keyword here, right, is Gemini 2.5. So I think really what we're super proud of is what Gemini 2.5 has been able to do from a perspective of being able to build these kinds of agentic products and use cases. And there's a few different key components there, right? One is just these core capabilities. So for example, Gemini's performance on code and being able to really improve the quality of code generation, which we've seen has been something that our developers are super excited about, both in the way that they're using the models in IDEs, in the way that they're actually building end-to-end applications. We've also seen a lot of excitement even about using models like 2.5 Flash, which is a smaller, cheaper model, but you can actually use Flash to run a series of sub-agents that you can then stitch together to do larger scale tasks. And the ability to do that actually balances this cost-quality balance, which actually then allows you to do potentially a lot more, right, with the quality that the models can achieve. The other thing I would say that's super important is multimodality. One thing that's amazing about Gemini is it is superb at image and video understanding. So things like screen understanding are extremely strong. And when you think about what is the future of agents, you want actually an expert who is kind of looking over your shoulder, able to see what you're able to see, and then able to actually act on that. And so I think that direction of travel is also super powerful. Madhavi, I'm curious if I missed anything.
Yeah, to add to what Tulsee said, one thing that's worked really well for us is to use a really large model like 2.5 DeepSync to create plans, and then to have, as Tulsee said, smaller agents that are even 2.5 Flash or Pro based execute those plans. So context engineering is becoming really interesting. And I think there was a belief in the past that people needed to fine tune models in order to get really good agentic performance. But as we've seen, even competitors, ourselves, as we've just seen across the industry, prompting these models and passing the right information and context, whether it's the browser control that Tulsi was speaking about, or API calls, or user context, all of these can really help you assemble a very good agent as long as you define what you want to be done really cleanly. And I think a lot of the companies that we're working with, and even ourselves internally, are seeing that this is performing extremely well.
It's also kind of cool to that note, I think, that like the instructions that you provide really do make such a meaningful difference. And so I think what we're also learning ourselves and in partnership with developers is that how to instruct Gemini is a skill that we're going to continue to get better at and developers are going to continue to get better at. And these are also different model to model. And so that's, I think, an area that we want to continue to partner collectively on.
That's a great point you mentioned at the end. Is there any like paper or blog you guys have put out if developers want to go understand what are some best practices to prompt Gemini kind of families or model or like anything like that?
Yeah, we have actually some documentation, which I'm happy to share, Hassan, with you afterwards. And I think this is a space that we want to continue to do more. I think it's also important for us to just share examples, right? So, even on GitHub and others, like the Gemini Cookbook, like trying to actually put out examples of what can you do with Gemini, what can you build, what have we built, that then can become playbooks for developers to build on, I think is super helpful.
No, 100%. Like, I'm a big fan of the 2.5 family. I'll be honest, before that, I was not using the Gemini models for some of the products we're building. We were very big on the two other companies, but we have actually moved multiple loads over to Gemini, both Flash and Pro, and exactly use Flash for breaking down smaller tasks, but we find it the latency and cost. So totally agree with you on that. Kind of flipping the switch a bit here. If I'm a user, like I'm not looking to do access the APIs, I'm looking to like build companies. I'm just like, hey, I'm gonna go to the Gemini app. I want to use this deep thing. I want to use this planning, just like regular user. What are some examples of amazing use cases you're finding folks leveraging the Gemini app to get some outcomes?
Use cases for Gemini apps. So actually, if I can answer your previous question and then I'll answer this one. One method that's become really popular that really works well with the Gemini family is the RASCEF. So role, action, steps, context, examples, and format. If you just follow this, I think Gemini performs excessively well. So really try it. In terms of use cases, yeah. And honestly, prompt engineering is converging. And I think more and more you should look at context engineering. And there are some great papers that have come out of, I can send them around. And honestly, it's just an art and you try it out and it works. So in terms of use cases in the Gemini app, one of my favorite use cases is making videos from images and making them as silly and fun as possible, sending them to all my loved ones, my bosses, to Tulsi, to everyone who's like, please stop sending me photo images and pictures of myself. And I'm like, no, I will not stop.
It's actually
But
very like you'll get a random message from Madhavi on a Sunday morning. She's like, I got this.
yeah, and Tulsi is doing like a full Bollywood dance, like with 6 costume changes, and Tulsi's like, "Thank you." I'm like, "Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you very
That's amazing.
much."
I didn't know that you can actually like do that. That's a cool one as well.
We're getting super good at character consistency, so the dancing Bollywood Tulsi looks like Tulsi, and so, in my opinion, that's awesome.
Well, I think that's like very useful to creators as well, right? Like creators love that type of use case.
And it's just super creative, right? And I think that's actually like one of the areas with like VO3 that it just like we're getting to a place where just creative expression, I think, is getting more fun in the context of the Gemini app, which is super cool. Um, and then beyond that, some of the cases that I think that I continue to love are deep research and Canvas, right? So both of these in the app, I think, are really good examples of what 2.5 Pro can do really well, right? So I've been using Canvas for a number of just like fun examples and actually just even fun game nights with friends. And so like we've actually started now taking on a routine of using Canvas to create interactive Jeopardy boards, trivia questions about Bollywood trivia night, Harry Potter trivia night, create an interactive game board, play with your friends. And so I think it speaks more to the fact that Gemini is able to combine like a lot of just world knowledge and reasoning with these creative capabilities like Canvas or like video generation. And so now you can do really fun things where you can bring the context that you have about the world, whether that's context about what is Jeopardy or context about, you know, a creative domain or context about some specific topic, and then actually translate that via code into something rich, right? And then deep research allows you to take some of this even further in terms of building research reports and kind of more deep and in-depth reasoning.
That's amazing. I think like the trivia, I'm gonna like use Gemini now for like some trivia night.
It's fun.
That's a cool one. So kind of talking about like your recent kind of like really big, I think announcement. You guys won one of your Google's models, like just won at the IMO. And, as a developer, it's always interesting, like, how much attention you should be putting towards like these benchmarks, or what should instead you should be focused on. So I just want to curious to know like your thoughts on this. It's a huge thing. Just curious to know how you guys think about that, and like a bit more about like that win as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think one conversation we have internally a lot is how do benchmarks or performance on something like IMO translate to real world performance? And I think one thing that I find really impressive is that really, in some ways, being really good at the IMO is also just a really strong signal of reasoning performance. And that reasoning performance translates across domains. So you see that play out in math, but actually, as the model gets better at math, it's also just getting better at verifiable reasoning. It's getting better at logic. It's getting better at problem solving. It's getting better at proofs. And those are things that translate to code performance. Those are things that translate to research performance. And so I think actually we're seeing that the IMO gold model is also really good at these other things and these other domains. And so that generalizability and translatability of reasoning, I think, is also partly why we're so excited about these wins. And then there's just the fact that in and of itself, the fact that we can push those boundaries means we can be a better partner for math research too, which has also been really cool to see as well.
And to like talk about math research for just a moment more, we are now attempting one of the unsolved Millennium Prize problems, and we're trying to see if we can, try to. And again, there's nothing but like pure reasoning. The other thing that we do is we work very closely with our enterprise customers with cloud. And for instance, AI summarization or translation, use cases that even 2.5 Flash Lite and 2.5 Flash as a family do really well at are other things that are becoming really popular. And then we make sure we get lots of feedback from these enterprise customers so we can routinely, direct the model to perform better at these real world use cases. So I think it's a combination of both.
Kind of talking about some of the real world use cases as kind of like these models get used in agentic products, evals, and understanding and controlling the trajectory of these agents become pretty critical to build like good applications. Is this an area Google and DeepMind is working on to make it easier for developers? Maybe some thoughts, insights you can share that I think that'll be very helpful. This is like personally like very exciting area for me, because I think as I build products, I'm always thinking about how do we kind of like do a better job here.
Yeah, I mean, I think Madhavi's spending a lot of time on agentic evals right now. So you want to talk a little bit about what we're thinking about?
Yes. So, the short answer is yes. Do we want to provide tools to make this easier? Yes. Do we want to make all of our evals agentic and start measuring the real world performance of all of these things put together? Not just with like one model across the board, but with different model sizes, planning and executing, as well as, for instance, what muddies the context and what doesn't, right? So, for instance, sometimes we found that browser control produces a lot of logs that are very messy and that really confuse agents. And so, for instance, you can have a sub agent do that, but when the user is chatting with you, all that context, if you put it directly into the agentic context, the model performs really well because that's very useful context for the model. And so, plus, with Gemini 2.5 super long context, Tulsee, are we at 1 million or 2 million?
1 million.
1 million. But essentially, we have the capacity and we will at some point serve 2 million too. This will get easier and easier. So, let's think about the world 6 months from now, a year from now. Like, we're going to have such large context that all of this context engineering will become easier and easier. But I think the important thing for developers to do is to build for models of the future, because if you start building today and you catch the market in 3 months, you have a completely different capability set, and if you're not very flexible, you're behind already, which is insane, like, to think this is where software engineering has come to. But yeah, we are working on this. We will provide something. I think at Google we can accept that we should be providing better solutions in this space, and we're working on it.
I think also this goes back to Madhvi's earlier point about context engineering, right? I think one of the things that is like really exciting about long context and really exciting about what we can do already, and yes, we should build for the models of the future, but even for the models of today, is we can help the models learn so much more and actually be more dynamic in the way that we're executing these trajectories. And I think that's a space we want to continue to lean more into. One thing I would also say, Hassan, is like, I think you kind of noted on this, like the use cases of the future are also changing. And by future, I literally mean like even a month from now are changing. And so one of the things we're consistently doing is trying to adapt our evals to keep up with that, to kind of test out new user journeys, to test out new approaches. And also part of that is also creating prototypes where we can test and learn from. So if you see Mariner, if you see Astra, like a number of things we're putting out are actually also trying to test out different types of agent workflows so that we can actually learn from what users are finding value on, trying, and then actually make the model better as a result of that too.
No, I think like personally, when Gemini announced that 1 million context window, I think that is amazing. And Adi, you mentioned there's like you guys are on track for 2 million. That'll be huge. Is that like something in the next few months, like next quarter? Like, is it still?
Yeah, and in fact, previously we have released 2 million context windows. So we actually have models and use cases already with customers that are leveraging the 2 million context window. I think part of it is really trying to make sure that we balance and understand the value of the 2 million context window, who wants to use that context window, and then how we release it in a scalable way. And that's what we're working on right now.
There's also external papers in this field. So there's one where you have reflective prompt evolution. So you have a genetic prompt evolution based on essentially it's all prompting and it outperforms reinforcement learning in some contexts. So this GEPA system takes reasoning, tool calls, tool outputs, and it reflects on what went well and what didn't go well in natural language to diagnose problems, takes multiple prompts, and then makes essentially babies out of those prompts that take the best part of the original parent prompts. And then those children prompts perform better even than RL if you go for like 25 steps or something. All this can be done in context engineering. So really, you're not fine-tuning anything. You can take 2.5 Pro today and get solid performance out of it. So this is something I recommend trying if you want to develop really advanced agentic systems, even with the models of today.
I'm gonna actually go like test it out for one of the use cases we're testing out. That's a great one.
Keep us
Uh,
posted on how it goes.
Yeah, I'll definitely share it with you guys. So one question as we kind of talking about context engineering prompt, this could be really relevant as well. We just had Amjad Masad from Replit on our podcast, and he said that with some context that people should not really learn to code anymore. The systems thinking architecture is obviously pretty relevant. So as AI handles more of the technical execution, what is a new essential skill in your opinion? We talked about context engineering, prompt engineering. Is that the skill or is it something else?
I think creativity is going to be one of the key skills in the future. Like if you can think of, it used to be that you could have really good ideas, but oh well, you couldn't implement them. As implementation gets really easier, I'm very excited to see what the human race can come up with in terms of just making our lives easier across the board.
Yeah, I mean, Madhavi and I talk often a lot about taste. And it's like a very interesting word in the new context of today because, especially like from the PM side, I think a lot about how like the PM role of the past was a lot of just like writing PRDs and trying to like frame out in words these like long documents of what you want to build. And now as a PM, you can actually build prototypes relatively quickly. Right. And so the world of what is a good PRD has also shifted, right? Like in some ways, evals are the new PRD, prototypes are the new PRD. Like being able to just like convey your vision effectively is a new skill set. So it's also about like, I think not just creativity, but like taking that creativity and being able to communicate it effectively. I think then that kind of boils down to like three skills, right? There's the creativity side of things and there's the communication side of things. And then I think you alluded to this too, Hassan, there's the like strategic side of things, right? So we're going to continue to need our engineering leaders to like help us architect how all these pieces come together and be strategic about when to leverage AI and how to leverage AI effectively. And so I think that knowledge is going to continue to be important. And I think we want our systems to be really strong partners to our engineers. And so I think having a bunch of folks who have the understanding and the nuance of when to effectively leverage, when to effectively verify, I think is going to be really important.
Yeah, and as Tulsi said, like with some of these principal architects and whatnot that traditionally firms employed, they kind of need to update their understanding of architecture to be LLM based. LLMs are changing the entire stack, from serving, what do you pass in user context, how do you iterate quickly on a stack, what used to be a big monolith that only like 10, high priests of said industry understood. Soon everyone is going to understand. So how can you make your stack really flexible and evolve it every 3 months as models come online, right? So I think Tulsi's point about making sure that the architecture and the strategy meet the LLM and the pace at which LLMs are evolving are also important.
Oh, that's a great point. So maybe as a follow up, you both have had amazing careers. You went to great schools, have had done really interesting things, and we are at the frontier of like one of the biggest waves we are going through. If someone is starting their career today, what maybe quick 30-second advice would you have for them? What are some things they should be focusing on?
I think build. I think my number one advice for anyone right now, and in fact, I was actually just talking to my cousin who's in high school about what she should do. She's like, I just took my first computer science class. Like, what should I do over the summer? And I was actually just telling her, like, I think that the amazing thing that these tools do is provide more access, right? And they provide the ability to build more with less software engineering knowledge. They allow you to actually, and I think some of these things, even like prompt engineering, context engineering, you only build through trying. Like you build some of the intuition from trying out a prompt and realizing how the model reacts, from trying to build something and seeing where things fall down. And so I think the best thing you can do is to come up with a simple idea and just try to build something end to end and see how it works. And you will fall over multiple times in that process, but you will iterate and you will build a lot of intuition and nuance, which I think will take you a lot farther.
Or you could do something that's not in tech. You could be a vet, you could be a nurse, you could be a therapist, and take care of all those people who will be building out there. So I mean, I think it's important that we think about careers expansively, especially as technology progresses. And I think there's a lot of like fear, uncertainty, doubt out there. But it's important to remember that humans will still be humans, and there'll be a lot to do, and to kind of grow your veggies and have friends and go out into the sun. I have two girls, and I tell them to stay super grounded, and I often give them advice to just like not take all of this so seriously as well.
Jeffrey Hinton, like I think was on a podcast. He said like, "Hey, you should be a plumber," and he was like pretty serious. Like maybe he's a researcher, so he just gave it very serious ways. But he's like, "Yeah, like you should be a plumber." I was like, "Hey, that's an interesting advice coming from
I mean,
the
I'll
guy
be
who invented."
honest, like we're still going to need plumbers.
Yeah, great advice, right? And they pay well.
But I think it's also interesting when you think about even roles. So, like, my mom is a physician, and like she and her organization are like actively talking about what is the role of AI in healthcare and how do they need to think about their jobs differently, or how do they need to evolve their jobs over the coming years with AI. And I think there's just an aspect of like, I want to talk to a doctor, at least right now, who understands me, who can empathize with me, who can have that conversation. But I also do want my doctor to be able to be more efficient, to be able to use their time more effectively, right? My mom loves the fact that she has, transcription services that can actually make her note taking so much more streamlined and so much more effective for her patients. And so I also think what's exciting about the world of AI in these domains, like whether you're going to be a veterinarian or whether you're going to be a therapist, is hopefully there will be AI tools that help you do your job more efficiently, which can allow you to do more of the parts of the job that you actually really enjoy, which is also, I think, a really nice thing.
Yeah, and the human connection. I think creativity, taste, all the things we kind of talked about, like comes through that human connection, relationship, empathy. You can showcase to like whoever, whatever you're working through, and that has a lot of value as well. And overall, I think there are a lot of interesting avenues which are opening up for new jobs and new roles, which did not really seem possible before LLMs were a thing. So one kind of question is very interesting. We have both of you here today, and I will just love to kind of like go through like how does like a product leader and an engineering leader work together? Uh, we, so for instance, how do you guys coordinate priorities between pushing new research breakthroughs? How do you guys decide what to focus on for this quarter? If you guys can share a bit more, I think like audience will love to hear like how things get actually built in large organizations.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, constant communication, I think is our current model of operation. But I think maybe taking a step back to your question about like how do we prioritize? I think what's really helpful in general with a good product and engineering partnership is that you are actually doing this as a partnership. I think if you try too hard to say, oh, product is going to go write a roadmap and come back, I think you're going to find yourself inherently misaligned, because great research leaders and engineering leaders also have great product sense, and great product leaders are also embedded in the tech. And so you need both sides to actually understand the other's constraints to be able to then partner together on where you want to go. And so when we think about Gemini, I feel like often what we're doing is doing a combination of looking at user research, understanding kind of the needs across our products like the Gemini app or AI mode, looking at our developers' feedback and, some of our key customers and what are they asking for. And so typically what we'll do is a full exercise to keep bringing those insights in, right? And saying, okay, what we're hearing is these are the biggest gaps we're seeing in code, or these are the biggest gaps we're seeing in tool use, or these are the biggest gaps we're seeing that are leading someone to want to work with a competitor maybe instead of working with Gemini. And so we can pull those things together. That's part of it. But part of it is also we want to innovate. So we also don't want to just be following what we're hearing from users. We want to actually be looking forward and saying, where do we think the world is going to be in 3 years? And what are the key areas we need to invest in? Maybe that's long context. Maybe that's better audio understanding. Maybe that's amazing video generation that we really think are going to push the frontier. And usually our priorities are hopefully a portfolio combination of those two things. If we're doing it right.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is having admiration and like respect for what the other party offers is really important. It's really important to me that I work in an environment that fosters a lot of creativity and happiness because we spend so much of our lives at work. So in addition to everything Tulsee said, I think it's just making sure that you are seeing it from the other person's point of view. You're assuming best intent. When we're having disagreements, we're talking about them with each other, and then resolving them pretty quickly.
So as a follow-up to that, I think a lot of people just think of Google as Google, but obviously DeepMind is doing like really critical frontier AI search. How does that collaboration work, right? Like the DeepMind research, how does that show up in the product and application billions of people use across the globe? Like, I think that'll be very interesting for listeners to hear as well.
Yeah, so Tulsi, do you want to start with how GDM is the engine room, as Demis likes to say, of Google?
Yeah. And then, Madh, you should also talk about AI mode specifically, because I think, that's been an area where you've been jumping in a lot. I think so the way we think about it, as Madhvi alluded to, is like GDM and Gemini specifically is the engine room for what we're trying to power across Google, right? So if we're successful, we can use Gemini as the seed to power a number of just amazing different experiences across the company. And you're already starting to see that play out in what we're shipping, right? So if you look at AI overviews, it is one of the largest uses of Gen AI, if not the largest use of Gen AI across the world, right? In terms of users coming daily to search and using AI overviews to get useful support and answers. And I think we're seeing that play out then in that context versus the app versus how you might use AI in the context of Google Photos to ask questions about your photos, right? And so we really want Gemini to be the crux of that engine and then to be building common capabilities that are useful across our products. And so a lot of what we think about is how do we take all of these different use cases we're hearing from our product teams and then boil that down to the nuts and bolts of what Gemini has to be really good at to be able to power this kind of diversity of experiences.
I'll add to that, we work with Korai, who is the CTO of Google DeepMind, and he has also been recently appointed as the Chief AI Architect of Google. And his mandate is to bring AI and accelerate adoption of AI across our products, specifically starting with the 10 billion plus user products that Google has. So that's something that I work on. One of the things I worked on recently for the last few months has been AI mode, trying to make sure that we bring Gemini and the best of Gemini to AI mode and to bring it to users very quickly in ways that we can satisfy their quest for information in such a way that it can go down rabbit holes, it can search what it needs to search, it can bring back to you via either regular AI mode or AI mode deep research a really like effective view of the world. So I'll give you an example. I was recently furnishing my house and I had to like buy a bunch of things and I had no time and ended up just asking AI mode to help me understand features of different things. So like, I sleep and I'm very hot. What kind of blanket should I buy? Okay, should it be a wool? What is a duvet? Like we don't have duvets in India. I don't understand what that concept is. So I don't know. Like I asked it everything I wanted to ask. And at the end, I would click on the link, the inline link that the AI mode referred, and I just went and purchased it. I literally did not do any of my research on a website this time around. And as a user of AI mode, I felt very happy because I feel like I could make very informed decisions about, buying things that are going to be in my life every single day.
Yeah, I had this recently because we had to fumigate our house because we had termites. And I was like panicking. And this is one of those things where I feel like you don't know necessarily what even the right sources are, what like the right research is, what kinds of issues are you doing. And so I actually used like deeply our Gemini powered products. And I actually tried many of them to then cross reference between them how well they were doing to actually understand what are the consequences, like what should I be prepping, what are the key things, what like if you want to be more risk averse versus less risk averse, how would you handle fumigation? And so it's cool to be a personal user of our products, I think now. One thing I'll also say, actually, if you think about the search kind of motto of universal information that is like accessible to users, I think what's amazing is thinking about Gemini as the engine to like how do we just make that mission even more and more powerful? So it's actually about really just taking the goals we've always had about giving information access to our users in the most easy, informative, useful way and using Gemini to make that more effective in some ways.
No, I think the both examples you guys mentioned really interesting. Like I kind of go sometimes between Gemini app and sometimes like just like regular Google search with like the AI mode. I'm curious to know, do you in a way like, and I think you guys both identify that, right? Like, and then you used both these products to get the information and then made the decision yourself. Maybe you called them, maybe you kind of booked a service, maybe you shop. Would we see search eventually in Google's products, maybe through the app or maybe just through the browser, become agentic, and do end-to-end outcomes fully? And is that we may see a agentic Chrome maybe down the road, or is it like Gemini app? How is that being kind of thought through?
I think the hope is across our products that our products will be providing end-to-end support to users. I think that is the direction of travel we're moving in. I think to your point, there is a question of what are the right end-to-end tasks we want to support and how do we do that in the most effective way for users? And so I think that's going to be also about us experimenting with users and actually like working directly across these surfaces, across Chrome, across search, across the app, to actually build experiences in partnership with users, get feedback, and then continue to iterate and build on top of them in terms of figuring out, where is it easiest for you to access certain pieces of information? What are you comfortable delegating versus what are you excited to do yourself?
Yeah.
What verification steps do you want versus what are you fully willing to delegate? And I think that's where we have hypotheses that we're testing right now, and we'll continue to kind of iterate on that over the course of the next few months.
And across AI mode and all of our systems, we are partnering with our publisher ecosystem that we've spent years working with to make sure that we are bringing them, forward because they're the ones ultimately providing the service, providing the shopping sites, providing us with this data. And we want to go back and make sure that users are finding the right website to help them access the information that they want to access and then ultimately use our ecosystem in this way.
Amazing. Focusing a bit on like one of the biggest problems, I think, which has been a main focus for the three major labs, including Google, coding, right? Like Google has made huge leaps in the coding capability, like multiple announcements on Google I/O. Most recently, your CLI was launched, you made an acquisition with Vinserve. So clearly, like there's a focus on this space. Are there thoughts around launching a standalone model which is optimized for coding? Is it looking at more of a product around coding, which Google may come out with? Obviously, you just came out with CLI, which is open source. Just love like your thoughts and insights here.
In terms of model, I think our philosophy is that we will do what's right as long as there's a model where the capabilities generalize and transfer and it can still perform really well on code. That's what we're going to invest in. If at some point we do research where we find a notion that having a code specific model really like outperforms a model that has generalized capabilities by and far, then I'm sure we will consider having a code model. But so far, our philosophy at DeepMind, which has really panned out, is that keep the capabilities general, the models are far from saturated, and your capabilities will transfer. So at this moment, that's our philosophy, and that's what we're going with.
I think it also builds on the thing we were talking about earlier with the IMO and kind of math reasoning. I think another hypothesis we have is that as the models get better at code, they will all that reasoning also transfers, and vice versa. That other reasoning and world understanding capabilities transfer to code, right? And so these things actually work really nicely together to hopefully build better end-to-end experiences. And so at least that's the thesis we're operating under. But to Madhavi's point, we're continuing to do research here, and so as we find signs of life that point maybe to other directions, we'll rethink that. But I think we're really excited about what 2.5 Pro has been able to
Yep.
do from a coding standpoint. And I think right now our goal is kind of to continue to push the frontier of that capability.
Yeah, and Hassan, to the second part of your question, right? We at Google definitely understand that our code offerings are fragmented and we're working on creating something amazing. But meanwhile, Gemini CLI has been a really big success.
Yep.
And Gemini CLI is really good at code understanding, file manipulation, command execution, dynamic troubleshooting, and it's something that folks really like. We hear a lot of positive feedback, and it's really like working well with 2.5 Pro and our 2.5 family of models. Obviously, we just have welcomed Windsurf into our mix, and honestly, I'm so amazed by the talent. In addition to the product that they have, we work very closely with them, both Tulsee and I, and we have every faith that they're going to come up with something that's going to be a really powerful set of tools as well. So we're going to figure out how we can bring this to market and to our users. But I am actually very, very pleased with the way Google is progressing in the code space, both from a model perspective as well as from a tools perspective.
That's exciting news, right? As someone who is leveraging these tools on a daily basis, I think that's great to hear. Like there's focus, because I think it's always amazing to see how each lab is pushing the frontier and getting so many interesting things. And as a builder, you get so many new opportunities to build, and new things get unlocked with it. So kind of talking about some of the frontier work which is happening, what is kind of some interesting research which DeepMind has been doing, which we may see in the product, which you are very excited about, which you're able to talk about publicly about for now?
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I think, so first of all, I'll start by saying what's partly been so amazing about working at DeepMind, and part of the reason I think I'm so bullish on DeepMind is the research that is coming out of the lab. I think that there's so much foundational work happening going from architecture. So I think one of the things that's been pretty awesome is we're seeing innovation in the lab from pre-training all the way to post-training to inference time. And so what's been pretty awesome is we are actually actively seeing the team be testing how to scaling laws from a pre-training perspective and scaling laws from an RL perspective. And we're seeing research innovations on both, right? So the IMO model is, I think, a great example of scaling RL and our just ability to actually push on inference time what we can do. And I think RL is a place we're continuing to innovate and invest in because I think we really do see the value there. But at the same time, we're also investing in architectural improvements in things like multimodality, and specifically how can you combine modalities in a model in a way that's still really effective at all of the individual modalities combined, right? How do you improve on efficiency? So one of the things I think I'm really proud from a GDM standpoint that we're investing in from a research standpoint is efficiency. Because I think ultimately the goal here is not just to give users a really expensive model that is really good, but a range of model offerings that are all very good across different kind of size portfolios and inference portfolios. And that's going to continue to be really important. And there's a bunch of research we're doing there that is really promising. So I think we'll see a lot of those things play out over the course of the next few months.
And also, looking back at overall GDM, not just Gemini, I think the work that we're doing in science and mathematics, even agents, there's a lot of research that's coming out of all of these different. I mean, we won a Nobel Prize in chemistry, not that long ago. So I think that I feel like GDM's various research directions are something that I'm also very bullish on. And I think we have to figure out how to bring them into our products via Gemini family, as well as our overall, Google set of products in a way that's very effective for users. But I am actually very bullish about the research that's going on.
Maybe more broadly speaking, around public search, right? Like research, what is happening AI, maybe in the AI research space, or maybe what's already happened over the last 3 months, which a normal person may not be paying attention to, but should be paying attention to. Anything you can kind of reference or talk about?
So are you talking about research in the public domain or research even from other labs?
Yeah, generally, anything you're hey, that kind of breakthrough was really interesting. Maybe like public research paper or anything like that.
Sure, I can mention two. So one thing out of Anthropic that is a research direction that I found very interesting is the persona vectors. So monitoring and controlling character traits in language models just by editing how these persona vectors are. Tulsee, do you want to add anything on that one?
No, I think so this is very recent. This is something they released last week. But I think what it speaks to is there's an ongoing conversation across these labs and across the industry now about model behavior. And this idea that we need to kind of not just be thinking about these hard capabilities like code, but also the sort of almost softer capabilities of the model in terms of how they communicate. That can be things like tone, personality, humor, right? And there's a number of these elements. And when what Anthropic has been looking at is these idea of persona vectors, right? And the idea of like how can you better think through and actually better capture the model's ability to learn these kinds of behaviors, and what does that look like? And I think we've also been doing our own research on behavior, and how do we actually think about um, identifying a personality for the model and actually then building towards that, and what does that look like? Because ultimately the vibes also matter just as much as the kind of raw capabilities and performance. But Madhu, you said you had a second one.
Yeah, the second one that I'm really excited about is this one. It's called hierarchical reasoning models. So, a lot of the reasoning models that all of the labs, all of the three major labs have in the world right now are essentially chain of thought reasoning models. And this hierarchical reasoning model is actually a small model. It's only 27 million parameters. And they basically have two interdependent modules, a high level module that is responsible for slow abstract planning, and then the low level module that's handling rapid detailed computations. And in a single forward pass with just sequential reasoning, this model has outperformed a lot of much larger models. So I thought that this method was really interesting. And I'm sure actually with all the research going on in Gemini, there's a team that's already exploring this methodology. But when I read this externally, I was quite interested and something I'd be, interested to look how we can apply it.
Well, that's super cool. Like I will actually look into like all these you mentioned. And maybe like, as a follow-up to this, like what are some unknown problems right now in the AI space, which, people are maybe starting to pay attention to, but no one really like still is not a big focus on. But you're like, hey, like it'll be cool someone solves this or like tries to like figure it out.
I think there's a number of spaces we're starting to look at more and more that are still relatively unknown, but are earlier in their kind of evolution, I guess maybe is the right way of putting it. Um, I'll go back actually to this whole model behavior kind of notion and this idea of like personalization, and like adaptability and steerability. We've had conversations about steerability for a long time in the industry. But what does actually good model behavior look like? I think is actually a particularly hard question, right? And one that probably differs user to user, right? What I would want to engage with probably, Hassan, is different than what you would want to engage with. And right. And so how do we think about what the right level of adaptability and personalization means for these models and these agents? And how do you find the right balance between creating something that is personal and that is like effective for an individual, but also that still is balanced in how it is approaching? And so that's an area that I think we're just starting to see kind of take form, and what does that look like is interesting. I think another one I'll call out is evals, right? So one of the things actually today we announced Game Arena, which is kind of a fun benchmark we're releasing in partnership with Kaggle, where AI models will play games like chess against one another, as a way of evaluating capabilities. And I'd say that's kind of a test bed of a thesis that AI benchmarks of today are going to continue to get saturated quickly and are going to continue to, be amazingly useful for measuring a certain task. But how do you really measure these more organic capabilities like model behavior that are maybe more subjective? How do you evaluate the models as they continue to get better and better and better, as maybe more rapidly than even the benchmarks are getting better, right? And so I think continuously evolving how we evaluate AI is a space like we need to be investing in and also others need to be investing in.
Another one I'll mention that I'm really interested in is in context reinforcement learning. So obviously the traditional method of doing RL is that you update weights and you learn. And if you're learning this way, it's expensive. You have to fine tune models. It requires post training. In context learning is something that happens at inference time, but it doesn't update weights. And if you do it right, it's really good for agentic stuff as well as decision making. So think you're like in AI mode or in the Gemini app, and you're trying to look for a flight. It knows that, let's say I have two children, these are their ages. I don't want to go to a place that's, let's say like a 5 kilometer hike that doesn't have a place for me to, put my bags down before I get to my hotel. Like, it's not a point of time where I want to be super adventurous. What if the model can infer what I want to do based on a conversation it's having with me? But it's not just about having personalized context, right? Because me, the same person, might want to go on a super adventurous, holiday where Tulsi and I are climbing, the half dome or something. And yeah, thank you for declining so generously. But I'm saying, like, I would really like us to have an in-context deployment of reinforcement learning for every single agent, every single interaction that you're having with all of the Google surfaces. And then figuring out what of that is something that's personalized context that you want to pass across, but what of that is just something that's part of this conversation. And I think we as humans do this all the time, right? Like in this moment, I will hold a lot of stuff about you in context, Hassan, and you about me. And then tomorrow, we're not going to really update our weights to make each other like a prominent part of each other's life. Maybe we'll see. But the
Well,
point
that's
is,
very true, right? Like you have a
yeah,
conversation, you have that in the context, and then you go through your day and you forget that context, and that's a key point. Actually, my next question was around this, like, hey, how do you for agentic products, especially like holding context is such a hard problem today, and if you don't hold the context, you can literally like not have the right outcome. You're working with a product downstream and maybe in 3 hours it just does not hold that context. Humans are very good at that. You can like go through your memory, be like, hey, I talked to Madhvi about X thing a week ago, and you can flip the conversation, but like agents are not good at that. So is that
yeah,
is
and
that
maybe you'll remember the paper, but you won't remember every single thing about me, and you'll take away the salient points, and then you'll get rid of context. But I think this is a very active area of research across the board that I don't think any of the labs have really solved, and it's something that we would be happy to solve first.
no, like I think that would be like a huge thing. If that gets solved, I think like agentic companies would have such an amazing outcomes, because like I've started seeing like how valuable that could be for products, especially in enterprise use cases. And maybe we can talk a bit more about this as well, right? Like I've been looking at memory and process level memory to some extent. This context can also be a process level memory, and can you like hold that process level outcome, especially for enterprises? It's so important that, hey, like how my compliance is done, how my L1 automation is done, or whatever use case. What is kind of like some of the biggest barriers you guys see in the memory space right now for process level stuff? Because agentic products, struggle with that unless you are able to access tribal knowledge and all of those things within in a company, and even then, it's hard.
In my opinion, one of the ways that a lot of the recent papers are implementing this context engineering stuff is having a separate memory unit agent. And that seems to be working a lot better than passing a lot of this memory in context. And the reason is because our models across the board in the industry have not figured out yet what to take and what to discard if everything is shown to them, en masse. And then passing it, using high bandwidth memory, and then, bolstering with things like RAG. So if you want, for example, if you are Goldman Sachs and you have a bunch of your private documents and you want to reference those private documents, you don't want the model to come up with its own idea of things. You want it to very much, or if you're a lawyer company or insurance company, financial reports, right? These are things where you want very much that the model should reference data at hand. Um, and I think we, on the research side, are trying very hard for the model to understand what to use out of what context. So, what should you use out of the conversation you're having? What should you get from RAG? What should you get from the memory unit? And then how should you put it together, right? Add to this, for instance, personalized context. Add to this, in context learning. So I think the key research is how do you put all of these different pieces of data today. And if you think about it, a lot of tool calls, right? So you have all of these different tools available to you. There's a world in which a lot of things are MCP. You can reach out to them and interact with them using this MCP format. But now let's say you have all this information available to you for one query. How do you figure out what out of all of this you need to use in order to construct the most useful answer for the user? And I think that is an active area of research. And what I've seen work so far
Is
is
that
to
is that
use,
something like Gemini is working on? Because that's like exactly
yes.
use
Yes,
case I have. Like if
absolutely.
like Gemini comes out with a model, we'll plug it in and we will like have a huge outcome for our users. It'll be amazing.
Yeah, because I think actually that is like maybe to Madhvi's point, I think that is the unlock, right? And so this is partly like part of it is how do you create the right context, right? And how do you create the right memory, right? Whatever, however you want to refer to it. But I think a big part of it is how do you train the model to know what it should use when, right? And that's how do you be smart about and that's also like one interesting thing we're researching is also how to not like, for example, over personalize or overuse the context, right? A bad outcome also is that you give the model a set of context, right? So, for example, we have this conversation, and then Hassan, you're in a conversation tomorrow, and then that context is what is dominating that conversation, right? And so we also want the model to like be calibrated on how well to use certain aspects of the context, when to leverage certain tool calls, when to leverage the information it has at its domain. I think about, we used to have these open book, final exams in college, right? And the skill set wasn't actually necessarily even having all the information in your head. It was knowing where the information lived in your notes and knowing that you had to go get it from that specific place to like combine it in the right way to solve the problem, right? And I think a lot of this is about giving the model that skill set.
And specifically what to discard, right? Like if Tulsee is talking and I'm shouting at her like 2 plus 2 is 4, 2 plus 2 is 4, 2 plus, this should not really alter the answer. She should really understand, yeah, that this is garbage and not relevant to the question you've asked. So I think models are not great at this yet, but this is an active area of research for Gemini.
That's great to hear. I think like as we kind of build some agentic products, we've kind of seen like a context and memory has to some extent are the bottlenecks to get those amazing outcomes. And one of the biggest issue was actually you can distill all these memory down, you can distill these preferences, but then you have like these 10 different things. How does the model know like what to pick unless you can be very prescriptive? But if you're then prescriptive, then you kind of take away the benefit of the preferences in
And some of
memory.
the
And
serendipity and value, right? You cannot
yes,
be fully prescriptive about how every
yeah.
user in the world will have interesting context.
Yeah, and sometimes you give it flexibility, but doesn't then get the right outcome because obviously they're not optimized for this use case. So it's cool to know this is an active research area for Gemini, and it will be very exciting to see as the models get better at this.
Yeah, we're very excited about it also.
I know we have like few minutes left. Is there any specific area which would be interesting to talk about from as a wrap up question? I have like few questions, but like I was kind of thinking about the Gemini 2.5 deep think system. Kind of going a bit more into that, talking about a bit about the responsible AI focus. Tulsee, I saw you did some work in that area as well. So like, ethics around models, that was like one area. So the Gemini 2.5 deep think system obviously achieved the gold medal performance at the IMO. We kind of talked about how this kind of converts to like as a proxy for reasoning, which we can show in like a lot of other areas as well. Can you walk us through how multiple AI agents working in parallel fundamentally changes what's possible compared to like single model approaches? Because to some extent, this deep thing did that. And I think it'd be very interesting to know like how you guys got this model to do what it did to achieve this gold medal.
Yeah, one of the things that is really interesting is the diversity of responses that this model creates and the breadth of problem space that it traverses. So, for instance, we were working with a mathematician later on, and he had solved this conjecture as part of his PhD, and he found that the model solved it in 4 to 5 other ways. And I think this is a particularly interesting part of the DeepSync model. Also, in terms of things like code, we looked at code forces, we looked at really hard problems. So one of them is to catch a mole, where you have a bunch of nodes in a tree and you have a mole in one of them. And how can you find the mole with the fewest traversals of the tree and with the fewest steps? This is again something the model was exceedingly good at because of the breadth and diversity of problem spaces that it's able to traverse. And generally, I think that with the DeepSync model, its ability to do math, code, and even like having a really superior visual aesthetic and understanding, and therefore producing websites and apps that are very beautiful. These are the things that I feel like are differentiators about the DeepSync model. Personally, I would also use it for planning trajectories because it does such a good job of exploring the problem space that you can then execute a lot of the stuff with smaller models that are less expensive at inference time. So for me, this was one of the most interesting things about DeepSync. What about you, Tulsi?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also the really, I want to highlight the last part that Madhavi just said, which is exploring multiple perspectives, right? So I think when you go back to your question around like, what does it really mean to do parallel thinking, right? I think, the very literal interpretation of that phrase is actually very powerful, right? Which is what happens if you can explore multiple different approaches and paths, right? And then actually look at those and then synthesize from those another set of potential paths, and then synthesize from those the final direction that you think makes the most sense, right? And in some ways, that's how we problem solve today, right? If you look at how Madhavi was doing furniture shopping, right? She's exploring actually like multiple different approaches to how she might furnish her house. And then she's saying, okay, this is the one that I'm going to bet on. Now I'm going to go, a level deeper and a level deeper. And actually, I think being able to bring that kind of richness to a lot of these reasoning tasks allows you to get much, much farther in the complexity of what you can solve. And I think that's what we're seeing play out with deep think now.
So I have some fire questions. These are just like fun questions.
Yeah.
And we'll go one by one. And so daily workflow, what is one AI product you use daily?
AI Studio. Okay, Tulsi, you go first.
I was just saying, I'm an AI overviews AI mode daily user, but that is all, I guess maybe not surprising. I would also say the other one that I am becoming a like bigger and bigger user of is actually like literally just Canvas as a way of prototyping ideas, especially because I'm pushing my PM team on just doing better of like creating what I'm calling visual PRDs, so like visual representations of what they want the team to actually build in terms of like hypothetical demos of the future, which is kind of
I'm gonna go check out Canvas after this. So
yeah.
inspiration, most underrated researcher everyone should follow, or paper one should definitely read.
Madhvi. Madhvi, go first.
I don't publish. I don't publish papers.
And she's not on social, so you actually can't follow
Yeah,
her.
I am like, you cannot find me anywhere. I am the most introverted social person there is.
Yeah, I tried to look you up on Twitter. I could not find you. So I was like, hey,
Yeah,
maybe.
I'm nowhere. I have 2 children, Hassan, and a job that's insane. Okay, I am barely surviving as it is.
I have an 18-month-old, and it is hard to like manage everything with like a young kid. So
Exactly.
2 is like a lot.
Plus, women have to birth them and stuff too. So there's a lot going on.
That's a hard job. My wife tells me every time.
Yes, exactly. Good. I'm glad we've cleared that up.
So how do you stay updated on what is happening in the AI space beyond just like within Gemini team meetings and things like that?
Read X, read papers that come out. We have a lot of channels where we share external research that comes out. We have journal clubs. I use AI Studio constantly to explain papers to me that I don't immediately get, to work with AI to help me implement versions of those, to see how that implementation works. I'm using AI Studio every single day for all of my work, and it's incredibly helpful. And I'm starting to use more of the CLI type coding agents as well now to help me understand code bases, to implement things, and to like just to have more agentic workflows in code.
I think actually one way to keep up that is, I think I found really fun actually, is to even just stay on top of the latest products that different companies or labs are releasing. So for example, Manus released wide research last week. And I think every time these new features come out, even just spending an hour to try and test something, right? And if you don't have access for whatever reason, to look at results of other people testing it, right? And trying to build intuition for what are people building? What are the use cases they're trying to tackle? How have they built it? What can we learn about from what they've built? And I find that for me, it's just like a very nice practical way of staying grounded in where the industry is going.
And the other thing is to have a lot of young friends who all they do is go to like these fun AI parties. Then you don't have to go to any parties. And then yet you can hear all the research gossip that goes on. So that's the other trick I have.
The alpha in like these AI parties is crazy.
Yeah.
So last one, non-AI hobby that keeps you sane.
Oh, I'm a dancer. So that's my number one way I spend my time outside of work in the hours that I get in between things. And so that's been really, really nice as a way of keeping me sane. It's like awesome because I think when you're learning a dance, you actually cannot think about anything else. And so it really forces you to actually be just like present with the music and movement. And I really actually appreciate that.
I grow and forage for mushrooms. So I've grown
cool.
blue oysters, golden oysters, lion's manes mushrooms because San Francisco weather is very foggy and it's really the perfect environment for like really yum edible mushrooms. And then I went mushroom hunting for morels in the Sierra, a couple months ago, and that was also magical. So for me, it's like just, mycology is very interesting.
That's amazing. No, guys, really appreciate the time you guys took out. This is like an amazing episode. I think like we got a lot of interesting nuggets from like research, papers, product, as well as like what Gemini is doing, and a bit about like your roles as well. I'm sure like the listeners will love it. We will get you anything like we should still cover, anything you think we missed in case you have a few minutes, or like hopefully you guys found the conversation to be useful as well, of like sharing what you guys are doing. Amazing work.
No, great questions. And thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so much, Hassan. Super nice to meet you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.